Selamat pagi, Bapak-Bapak and Ibu-Ibu. Thank you for taking your time to join the webinar today. We have already heard a lot, right, from Pak Semi, Pak Fadli, and also Yosta on the demo of the solution. So I will continue to elaborate and iterate some of these points specifically on ransomware, why are they on the rise? What are the impacts of ransomware and the attack vector, right? What is the attack vector used by ransomware? And importantly, what we can do to address and stay ahead of the ransomware threats. So a little bit of introduction. I am Hunter, the Apex CTO for Rich Security. Been in cybersecurity for close to 20 years, doing multiple roles as an end user, security consultant, managed security service provider, and also as an enterprise security architect, right? So I've been, in my previous capacity, a lot of my clients were also hit by ransomware all over Southeast Asia, right? I'm also a board of director for ISACA, past board of director for ISACA, Malaysia chapter, and the industry advisor for the Monash Malaysia Faculty of IT. So for the purpose of the talk today, we will be speaking on these three areas: the latest cyber attacks, can we stop it, and let me show you how, which has already been covered by the demo earlier by Yosta and also Pat Fadli, right? So the latest cyber attack, I'm sure one of the biggest challenges humanity will face is cyber crime, right? Cyber crime is a trillion-dollar business by 2025. A lot of us have seen cyber criminals on the rise. Cyber criminals either very advanced attributed adversary, which is hired to go and attack targeted victims, or they are the alternative where they go on mass target, right? Working with different parties, such as ransomware as a service. So for ransomware as a service, there is a certain ransomware where there is a distribution network and the ransomware provider working together to distribute and share the proceeds of the ransomware. That's why there's so many different ransomware capabilities now. The unscrupulous parties can be the agent of the ransomware, distributing the ransomware to the targeted victims. Every aspect of ransomware is increasing, from the number of victims. So you see the number of victims is on the rise across many countries, not only in Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, but many countries all over the world. The number of payouts and the amount is increasing. So more people are paying. At the same time, the quantity being paid out by the victims are increasing as well. Like Pak Sami mentioned earlier, a lot of the ransomware payout are being made in Bitcoin because unfortunately, the Bitcoin has been used by cyber attackers, by threat actors for malicious intent. Bitcoin, it is very difficult to trace the owner of the Bitcoin wallet. So it's not impossible. It is much more difficult to trace compared to a traditional fund transfer. Besides that, we also see extortion for stolen data in addition to ransomware required to decrypt the data. So traditionally, for all of the cybersecurity professionals, we think about the CIA triangle: confidentiality, integrity, availability. The first wave of ransomware, how it operates is once the ransomware or a form of malware hits your organization, it begins locking down or encrypting all of your confidential files until the whole operating system is deemed unusable. So that affects your availability of data, availability of resources, right? it impacts your organization's operations, because without the data, without the servers, without the applications, the organization is not able to proceed. So what some organizations do, they resort to backup, right? They resort to backup, try to restore the systems. But then we, as cybersecurity professionals, know most of the time, 50% of the backups on their backup systems also fail, because either, number one, that has also been impacted by ransomware, or number two, the backup is not up to date, right? The recovery time objective and recovery point objective was not taken into account when the backup was taken. So besides affecting the availability, like the first waves of ransomware, and ransomware has now evolved to affect the second triage in the CIA triangle. So ransomware has moved to exfiltration, right? Like Pak Semi mentioned earlier, not only encrypting your data, but exfiltrating all the sensitive information out and threatening it to be sold on the dark web for X amount of Bitcoin as well. So not only your organization is not able to decrypt the files, the sensitive customer information, PII, PDPA, credit card number, which is PCI, potentially merger and acquisition documents, company strategy plan, are stolen and sold on the dark web for ransom. So this is something we call the double extortion, not only affecting your availability, but the confidentiality of information as well. So a lot of studies has shown that most probably the latest wave, which is in the papers and research, the most advanced form of ransomware, it might be able to affect your integrity, meaning it will go in and modify your data, right? So what if that happens? What if the ransomware is able to modify the data? That will cause a lot of chaos in the organization and environment. One of the latest ransom cases going in the wild, obviously all of you have heard, is the MOVEit vulnerability, where the MOVEit vulnerability also leverages on data exfiltration. So it's also a form of vulnerability impacting already a lot of organizations in the States and organizations which use that particular application. So having said that, what do you know about ransomware? Ransomware normally, occurs after business hours, 76%. This is all the data that we have seen and obtained from the Gartner 2023 report. So 80% chance an organization will be hit by ransomware within a 90-day period, regardless whether you're large, medium, or small enterprise, right? If you have a public facing, if you have email, most probably the chances are high. 90% of the ransomware hits company less than $1 billion and below. 1/3 of the organization pays for the ransomware. And even if you pay, there's no chance of 100% recovery because 35% of your data could be lost due to ransomware. There's this most common type of ransomware. We have spoke a lot of Lockbit. Pak Semi mentioned the latest version of Lockbit, and also he mentioned the attack vectors. But I like to further reiterate, right, the 4 key attack paths of ransomware according to the Verizon Database Investigation Report 2022. There are some attack vectors or some ways that ransomware come in and propagate the whole environment. So the most common one that we see is default and weak credentials. Pak Semi has mentioned a lot of protocols are actually internet facing. Your RDP, SSH, remote services protocol, all those are internet facing. So what the attackers do, they have already built the malware to take advantage of weak and default credentials, putting in a password brute force capability into the malware. Immediately after they have successfully break in and log on, they will then send the payload to detonate the ransomware within the environment. So that is an attack using credentials. The other form of attack is obviously email phishing. Email phishing, the malicious email is weaponized with a ransomware file. Once the user click the ransomware, it detonates and then will start impacting and affecting the machine. The third common ways or attack vector we see how ransomware spread is by exploiting vulnerabilities. Because by exploiting vulnerabilities, very similar to default credentials, by exploiting vulnerabilities, you eventually will own the server, the desktop, or the laptop, right? Once you own the machine, you can then do whatever you want with the machine. You can start sub-service, add users, copy files, install malicious programs, which is in this case is the ransomware. Last but not least, we have botnets as well. Botnets which try to deliver the ransomware payload.